everybody. Welcome to the premiere episode of Odd and Untold. Being joined today by the creative force, the creator of Small Town Monsters, most busiest guy in paranormal right now, Seth Breedlove, producer, director. Dude, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really cool to talk to you finally, because I'm actually a fan. I'm a fan of your writing. I'm a fan of the approach you take to Bigfoot especially is interesting to me, and for some reason there aren't a lot of people that I follow when it comes to this stuff, but you're one of the guys that I tend to follow. And,
really, thank you.
Yeah, have since the early days of STM. Oh, awesome. And also, like, I think I've said this to you, but you're one of the few people where if you review something of ours, I actually read it. so like, yeah, I think,
yeah, and I know you do.
I think, yeah, I legit do. And I think one of the reasons I do is because you've said you've had negative things to say about STM stuff. And I tend to respect the things you had to say, even if like I don't initially agree with it. I like to read that kind of feedback, any kind of feedback that's negative, but isn't just like screaming about some, like there's not enough evidence of whatever in this project.
Right.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I try to do, constructive criticism if I can. Yeah. I'm just not a kiss ass type of guy either. My blog for a while turned into kind of just destroying people, destroying movies and books, and I got very cynical, I'll put it that way. Just, I've been doing this professionally probably since like 2005, 2006. I had my own paranormal investigation group. I had the blog professionally. I'm not getting paid or nothing. Yeah. But, it just, and I'm sure you've experienced some of this, the negativity in the field and the territoriality. And like you said, people screaming and yelling criticisms at you that, or why are you doing this documentary if you have no evidence? Well, we don't know who Jack the Ripper is, but we still have documentaries on that. Like, just because you're not solving the mystery or presenting anything conclusive or earth-shattering doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. And to fanboy for a little bit here, and I'm totally not the fanboy type, but your stuff is really what sort of got me back into this, because I had stopped wanting to do this. Just, there was so much garbage out there on TV and the books that were coming out, and just every story you're reading in the news, it's just people taking pictures of orbs or just some dark mass in the woods, and there's red circles, and they're like, look, I see eyes, and it's carrying a baby, and there's a mother there, and there's the uncle of the Sasquatch, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And then I started watching your stuff, and that just really restored my faith that, like, there are people out there, if I look hard enough, who take this seriously, and just really have a fair and balanced approach to it, a rational approach. They're not trying to tell you this is what you need to see, this is what's happening, and I love that about your stuff. So
well, yeah, and just to piggyback off that, like, first of all, I really appreciate that, but the interesting thing about what we're doing is I feel like at this point we have like there's three different avenues we're telling stories. One of them is like the legend movies. So you've got the stuff like Momo, which you're wearing the glorious Sam Sheeran shirt. And Jersey Devil is very much in that like Momo camp. It's like half the movie is a narrative film. But those movies tend to be saying something about storytelling, and they're movies that are about story and story evolution and storytelling more so than like like evidence gathering and evidence presentation. That first of all, in all honesty, that stuff bores the heck out of me. Like, it really does. And not necessarily to intake it. I can enjoy, dude. I don't know why, and this probably makes me a complete hypocrite, but I am completely addicted to this Skinwalker Ranch show right now that's on Stream Channel, and like I don't know why I can't fathom what's going on, but that's kind of what that show is, like evidence, and like here's all the evidence we have,
Right.
and I find myself like watching the show trying to figure out how much of it is fake, if any of it's fake, how many of the people that are on the show are in on the fact that it's fake, how much of it is taking actual events and kind of like twisting it to be something else. But there's the legend movies, and then there's like On the Trail of, which is like I guess our version of the evidence kind of stuff. But to me, it's more about the people and the events that surround the subjects that we all love. And then we get into the real kind of evidence stuff with like Beyond the Trail and the Bigfoot Project, which I'm interested. Have you reviewed? I don't think you've reviewed Bigfoot Project, have you?
I think I did your first episode.
Okay, see, that's the kind of show where I'm like, what do people think of this? Because it's like, I'm figuring it out as I go. And to me, it's like, it started life as like, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to hijack your show here.
Oh, no, go for it, dude.
Okay. Yeah, I just like it began life as like it was supposed to be a podcast. It was literally supposed to be a video podcast show where Heather and I were going to go out in the woods, and then we would have an investigative component to that. And then that first episode, during the taping of it, everything popped off, and then I had a sighting the next day, and everything went insane, and it just completely changed the course of the show. Well, now we're like 6 episodes in. We just recorded an episode up there with Cliff last month, Cliff Berkman. Yeah. And he's coming back in August because he's really interested in what's going on out there. Not necessarily at the cabin, which is my area of interest is the cabin. Because everything happened to me at the cabin, and I know they're there. Like, I know I've seen one. I know that they stayed longer than just that weekend. I know that there was stuff going on well into November, possibly even December. But I don't think they're there right now. I don't, maybe right now, actually, I just talked, Heather just texted me like this past weekend, and stuff was happening again for the first time in months that she hadn't noticed in months. She does the whole gifting thing, which I'm not super into. I don't understand it, but she like leaves stuff out and it gets moved around. And initially it's like, okay, whatever. Except like it gets real weird when it's like she's leaving a rock out and that rock's getting taken and replaced by a squirrel skull. And then the same rock shows up like 2 months later in the exact same spot. Like some things that are going on there are pretty weird. And that sort of stuff just started again. Probably not coincidentally coinciding with the fact that all of our leaf canopy just came back in here and there's undergrowth like crazy again and all that kind of stuff. So, we create 3 types of, right now anyway, we're creating like 3 different types of video content, film, whatever you want to call it. And, we have no idea what we're doing, and I have no idea what I'm doing on a weekly basis. But like right now we're working our way through this Jersey Devil thing, and it's like a completely different, Momo was half the movie. Half of Momo is a narrative, but half of Momo is a narrative that can lean on the fact that it's supposed to be corny.
Right.
Because it's supposed to mimic like the style of a 70s drive-in movie. Whereas this movie, Jersey Devil, is like, we're trying to tell a serious narrative film that's tied into the doc, which, by the way, we haven't even shot the doc yet. The narrative's filmed, and we're editing the narrative, and the doc isn't shot. And I have a deadline of like August 20th to get this movie to our distributor. So this is the kind of like insane timetable we work on.
Yeah, I mean, you guys just, I think I said in one of my reviews that you guys just churn the stuff out. I think I compared you to the Beatles, because it's just like movie after movie after movie, and it's just consistently good. It's just, and it's just shocking how, not even just consistently good, but each film is just better than the next. And that's just amazing to me. I mean, you have an amazing team working for you and with you, and it's just great that there's so much content coming out, because it could be just, once a year or, once every 2 years. And it's just, you're putting out like three, 4 films a year. And then you got your YouTube stuff.
We did that. We did the Alaska shoot. We just got back from Alaska.
Yeah, I
wanted
to ask you about that.
Yeah, it was like this. It was supposed to be. So Last Frontier was kind of supposed to be a return to the initial maybe like 3 episodes of On the Trail of Bigfoot, which are very much like, a look at the history of the Bigfoot subject.
Right.
It was gonna be like that, but about Alaska, because I've always wanted to, maybe through like a personal lens, because I've always wanted to go to Alaska. My mom always wanted me to go to Alaska. My mom's dying. I was kind of like,
sorry.
Yeah, I was. It's okay. It was just kind of like tying those two things in together, and then we got there and we ended up with in the neighborhood of like 16 interviews, and we also interviewed Cliff before we went. So, and there's a couple other people I need to interview that are like tied to Alaskan history here in Ohio. So we're going to end up in the neighborhood, not here in Ohio, but I want to interview them here in Ohio. We're going to end up with like in the neighborhood of like 20 interviews. Wow. So it morphed into 2 movies, with the first movie being very much Last Frontier, which is like, it's kind of like the adventure movie. It's the history of Alaskan Bigfoot. It's, like us doing the helicopter ride and the boat ride, and here's what Alaska looks like. And then the second movie is like, hey, isn't it weird that like almost every single person you talk to that saw Bigfoot in Alaska is like talking about how terrifying it is, and so much of the lore ties into the fact that people are being taken by these things and that they're killing people. And it is like the dominant topic when you, or not topic, but it's like the dominant view of the subject over there. Wow. There's none there is none of the passive gentle forest giant kind of thing. When you talk to anyone who claims to have seen it or encountered it or heard about it as a child, it is this like terrifying event. Wow. And I thought that was really interesting. So our second movie, which I think is just going to be called The Hairy Man, is probably going to come out early next year, and that's going to be like a part 2 in the Alaskan Bigfoot trilogy, because we're also going to go back up and try to do something along the coast.
Oh, nice.
Like the BC coast and all that. And because we haven't interviewed, we haven't interviewed the Rain Coast Sasquatch. What's his name? I can't remember. The author of that book. I'm blanking on his name, but that guy, we need to interview that guy. And there's a lot more still to touch upon, but the second movie is crazy because, we booked an Airbnb. So the way we do these On the Trail of shoots, I don't know what the perception is of it from outside, but we're not Alex and Eli. We're not like staying out in the middle of nowhere. It would be impossible for us to make the movies we're making and do that. So toward the back end of this shoot, we hooked up with that Alex and Eli, and we did it up in Healy. Because I needed them for scenes, and like there was all the stuff we wanted to do together. Mm-hmm. So we booked an Airbnb in Healy, and the name of the Airbnb was literally Stampede Cabin. And for some reason, it never struck me that like Stampede is Stampede Trail, which is Chris McCandless, which is Into the Wild, which is like, we literally stayed in a cabin like on the last road that dude was seen alive, within 2 miles of the last place he was seen alive. Wow. And so, like that was super important to me because that movie was really influential. Like it came out at a time where I really needed it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely.
And I fell in love with that movie, and that movie's probably one of the reasons I'm making movies today. But it was really wild because we ended up, there ended up being all these ties back to McCandless, even as far as Bigfoot ties to McCandless that we found because of a former Denali Park maintenance worker who is also like one of the guys that ran the Boreal, or what was the Boreal Bigfoot conference that they did last year out in Alaska. He's one of the guys that helped put that on. He's a former park maintenance worker in Denali. and he found man, I don't even know if I should go into this. He found documentation that ties McCandless to a Bigfoot.
Oh,
And
really?
it is why it's like
Wow.
park records.
Really?
It's super cool. Not his death or anything. I'm not
Right,
like
right. But
I'm not trying to missing 411 Chris McCandless. I'm just saying like there's a really weird tie between McCandless and Bigfoot that you would not expect that's going to be in the movie.
interesting.
And so the movie begins with Alex, Eli, and I, and this is the second movie, not Last Frontier, but the
Right.
second movie is going to begin with Alex, Eli, and I literally walking to the spot where he was dropped off.
Wow.
So in Into the Wild, he hops into the pickup truck. They take him down Stampede Trail. They drop him off. It's like right there. We were able to walk that trail. So we're talking about missing people in Alaska on a road with probably the most famous missing persons case in history, arguably, like one of them anyway. And so that was super cool. Like we there's a lot of really interesting ties between that what with the trip we were on and things that are like formative to me becoming a filmmaker and to even to like Alex and his love of like adventure. Because like maybe we forget about that movie and the importance of that movie a little bit, or the book. Like the book is friggin' huge. I read the book back in the year it came. That book came out in like 2002? I want to say
Something like that.
something.
Yeah. Early
Yeah, and
2000s.
I read that book the year it came out, and there's just something about it, like that dude was a screw up. He killed him. Like whatever your take on that story is, it was just a really wild trip. I don't know what got me talking about that, but it was a, like
We were talking about all the different genres of movies you're making, and
right,
this one's
right.
Alaska.
That one's going to be, Last Frontier will be really personal in a unique way. Probably like in the way the journey was, but the second one, which I'm tentatively calling the Hairy Man, is going to be personal in a really cool like way that ties into some formative moments that I'm excited for people to see.
Awesome, man. How was Alaska? I mean, it looked beautiful. I mean, that's like one of my bucket list places to go to too.
Yeah, I left, so I want to buy property there. I was literally like toward the end of the trip, I started like Zillowing property in Alaska. And then, it was, it snuck up on me because our first 5 days there, we were all violent Leo.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my entire crew, not Alex and Eli, they were off on an island somewhere doing something else. But my crew that flew out of Ohio, we all got in, stayed the night in Anchorage, and then hopped in a van the next morning and drove to Homer. And once we got into Homer, we all started feeling weird. And then over the next 5 days in Homer, we were just kind of recuperating from this like horrific cold or whatever it was. But then once we rebounded, we headed up to a town called Soldotna. I mean, that was an indicator for what the trip was going to be like. 4 days in or whatever, we finally felt like we were making a movie. We got into Soldotna and we were driving down this road to a cabin, and we see this moose off to the side of the road. And it was our first time seeing a moose. So we all jump out of the car and we're filming this moose. And this lady in a pickup truck pulls up and she's like, "What are you guys doing out here?" Or whatever. I'm like, "We're filming this moose." And she goes, like you got those look like really expensive cameras. And I'm like, "Oh, great. We're gonna get mugged or whatever." And Heather starts talking to her, and it turned out that she owned a ranch there. And one of her ranch hands had just seen a Bigfoot.
Really?
And this was like the kind of like insane kind of thing that happened on this trip. So Heather's like, "Can we interview him?" She was like, "Sure." And so we drive to our cabin, and 5 minutes later they show up. I mean, we hadn't even unpacked our van. They show up at the cabin, and we interviewed this guy, and he's actually had 2 sightings of what he thinks is like the same creature. It's like a big white Bigfoot.
Wow.
In the neighborhood of like, I don't know, 10, 11 feet. They're all huge there. Every single, not every person, but I would say like 70-80% of the witnesses you talk to and the stories you hear are of creatures that loom over like 9 feet, 11 feet, 12 feet, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Wow.
And so he claims to have encountered this thing twice, this big white Bigfoot outside of Saldana. And that was the kind of like story we had, just come to us. We had a lot of stories, just like people came to us. We were in, even when we were all sick in Homer, there was a native woman who had 2 sightings that came to us and wanted to talk about those. So it was wild. It was everything I wanted. I've always wanted to go to Alaska. That was, when I was a kid, I don't know why I picked Alaska, because I would like to say it was that I read Jack London or something, but that's not the case. It was just like, for some reason I decided Alaska was this really exotic place I wanted to go. And so I became like mildly obsessed with it and did book reports on it and all sorts of stuff. I ran up like a $70 library fine on this Alaska book that I would constantly take out and then forget to return. And it was everything I wanted. We got to do we did a boat. We chartered a boat on like day 3 down in Homer when we were all still sick. And we went out on the boat for like 3 hours. He took us up some of the inlets, like way far up some of those inlets. I mean, it's funny because the boat captain was like, he's lived there for like 40 years or something, and he's a filmmaker.
Okay.
In fact, he's done what do they call it? Like he's done like shoot. He does like when there's a National Geographic shoot, they'll hire him to go out and get their like second unit. That's what it is. So he's he's been a second unit director a bunch. So this dude knows his stuff, but we're riding around on one of these inlets, going up this inlet, and I ask him like if he's ever seen anything or ever talked to anyone that's claimed to see a Bigfoot. And this guy let out the loudest, longest laugh, like just like berating me without verbally berating me.
Wow.
And it was that kind of thing. But I'm looking around, I'm like, how are you here and just writing it off? Because I'm like, we're up this inlet where there's no houses. We've been on this, like essentially like a river running up this inlet for like over an hour. There's no one on either side. You're not seeing anything except trees and mountain. And and over time he ended up having his own stories. I mean, that's the thing you find over time is like everyone, they might laugh initially, but like he ended up having his own stories about stuff he'd experienced or heard in the woods that he couldn't explain.
Yeah.
I find that everywhere, not just in Alaska, but in Alaska, it's really prevalent. Like that kind of like people initially act like they're kind of turned off to it, but then you come to find out they just kind of accept it, or it's like a part of their, it's just like ingrained in them that it's a possibility or that it's there.
Yeah, I think that's true with a lot of people with anything sort of paranormal. I mean, most people laugh it off, and it's just, and I found this over the years that, family and friends and people who never mentioned stuff before, but as soon as I got into like a paranormal group or I started blogging, that's when, people would start saying, hey, Jay, I did see something one time. Let me tell you about it. Or, and then the stories start coming out. Whereas, prior to this, they're laughing about it, or they're,
no, I had the perfect example of that literally just happened on Tuesday this week. The building where my office is, we rent like STM takes up like 3 different office spaces in this building. And we were, my landlord is this like really old school, like, I don't want to, the word I want to use would be to insult him, so I don't want to say it, but like, he's like a classic, like old school landlord where there might be mice running around your ceiling. Who knows? Like, deal with it. Like that. Right. But he's always, he's a nice guy, and he's always kind of like laughed when he walks in my office. Like he'll look around and he'll chuckle or whatever. And so this past week, I was having an issue with my air conditioner in here, and he's in here trying to fix it. And, he fixes it, and then he proceeds to just kind of like hang out. And I thought, this is kind of weird. Like, what's he, like he's asking me questions, but they weren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
And then, he's like, so what do you think this Bigfoot thing is? You think it's all just a legend? And I was like, no. It's like, no, I saw one last summer, so I'm pretty sure they're real. And like we start talking, and he's like, and I could tell something was coming because of the way he was acting. And he goes, yeah, he goes, I snowmobile. I own snowmobiles. And every winter we go up to Michigan and we snowmobile. He said he owns a cabin. Now he owns a cabin in Lower Michigan, but apparently back like 30 years ago, he owned a cabin in the Upper Peninsula. And I've been there, and it like if Bigfoot's anywhere, it's there. It's like it's uninhabited. There's just so few people, it's crazy. And so he's like, I owned a cabin up there. He's like, one day we were pulling his snowmobiles down Route 75. They're on Highway 75. They're coming through the Upper Peninsula, and I think he said it was just over the Mackinac Bridge on like over toward is it Mackinac or Mackinac? I think it's Mackinac. But they were just over the bridge. He said he's driving along, and he looks up into the hill on this hillside, and he sees this huge, hairy, ape-like thing walking through the woods. And he sees it long enough that he's able to gauge like its color. And, to tell like about what size it might be, and describes it as like huge, hairy, and ape-like. And he like goes into this whole thing, and he's like, and then he starts telling me, he's like, yeah, I think about it all the time. I never talk about it. He's like, I've never talked about it to anybody. But it was this crazy thing. Now I want to interview him because
definitely.
This dude, like, this story is never going to go anywhere. Like he apparently hasn't talked about it. He was with other people that day and didn't say a word to him.
Wow.
But that's like, guys like that are the reason that I put any credence in this topic to begin with. Like, because this is he's not a Bigfoot guy. He's not interested in Bigfoot. He kind of laughed at me for the last like 7 years or 6 years or whatever that I've been running an office here. And then you find out like he's got his own pretty clear sighting. Like,
right.
It's a wild thing.
And those are always the people that interest me too, because you get some people who they got 100 stories. There's a ghost that lives in my house, and his name is Phil, and he sits down to dinner with us, and and they've seen 17 different UFOs, and they've seen Bigfoot. And the people that really interest me are the ones who are reluctant to tell you, who only really open up to me or anybody when they find out that they're not going to get ridiculed, that they might be believed. And it's something they've just sort of carried around with them for a long time. And that's, again, another thing I like about your films. So you just get these witnesses who just seem completely credible. I mean, a lot of them want to stay anonymous.
The Alaska thing is, some of the witnesses are going to. Here's the thing: you're never going to find Bigfoot in Alaska. I don't think. Like, I've been there. I think if you're going to find Bigfoot, it's going to be in Ohio. It's going to be in Pennsylvania. I guess maybe the Pacific Northwest, just because there's so many people looking. Right. But like, Alaska is massive.
That's huge.
And it's massive. And when you get there are so few people and so few places that to think that you're going to walk out into the woods, the entire idea of doing a night ops there is absurd, unless you're in the location that like Alex and Eli are for they went out to that area A where I don't know if you've heard of it, but they went out there for like 7 nights and had insane stuff happen. That's your best chance. But as far as like just going out into the woods in Alaska and finding one of these things, it's not going to happen. But the witness stories, man, they'll if you're like a if you're totally closed off, I think some of these stories will make you change your mind. We interviewed this one lady, again, like, you know, an indigenous lady that grew up on an island, which is weird. The story made me question a lot of things. But she grew up on an island called Onalaska. Have you ever heard of it? It's one of the Aleutians. So she's like, okay, so during World War II, the U.S. built bunkers all over this island. There are no trees on this island. Like there's nothing, like when you look at pictures, there's brush, there's like underbrush, but there aren't trees. But she told us this story. She's 80 years old, like 81 years old. This happened when she was it happened in the 70s. She was a mom, a new mom. There were all these stories on this island of something coming into the village at night, stealing fish. And so people were telling people, don't go out at night. Like stay out of don't go out on the street. There's something coming in. It's not friendly. And this one night people started screaming. There was a horrible smell. There's this weird baby crying sound. They all flee into her sister's house, and they're in the house, and this thing comes to the window. And I don't want to give too much of the details, but it's like it's one of those classic, like I've actually had someone tell me in Ohio almost the exact same story for this girl that I used to work with who had a similar story in a similarly bizarre place, like a place you wouldn't think that would happen, where this thing with red eyes, but her description of it is like it had red eyes, but they were bloodshot from the wind because it's, you know, it's on this island in Alaska, so they just get hit, and its face was weathered, and you could see the lines and the wrinkles in the face of this, you know, the skin of the face of this thing, which, you know, the face was ape-like but more human-like than ape. You know, I mean, it's like your classic Bigfoot story. But this lady told, so when we were leaving, you know, the crew, we all went outside, thanked her for her story, and Heather stayed in there for a minute. And apparently she told Heather she was just glad that she could tell the story before she goes.
Wow.
Because she's like 81 years old. You could tell she wasn't in great health, you know, and that's something she's held on to most of her life. But it's such a wild story. Like you get, and those stories, it was like one after the next. I mean, we interviewed 16 people, and 14 of them had stories of their own, you know, like sighting stories.
Yeah.
So it was crazy. It was really cool.
That's awesome. And it's cool when you get like those stories you can kind of tell are legit. They're not embellished. They're not, again, these aren't people, you know, trying to just tell anybody and everyone. They got to kind of open up to you. They got to kind of trust you. And like this woman saying, like, I just want to get this off my chest before I go. Like, what motivation is there for that? To, you know, like, what does she have to gain from this?
Yeah, no, she has nothing. Yeah, she's just this elderly lady, but especially like the indigenous people in that area, they all accept it. It's not even like if you even bring it up, it isn't even like a thing. And right now the hot button topic is Port Chatham or whatever. You know, we got into it a little, and it'll play a role because you can't not address the importance of that story, at least like this, there the legend or whatever. But we didn't even touch on that to like a full extent. We still had the amount of stuff we had coming from people that live like in the middle of nowhere, to the point where there was one story, and we didn't get to interview this lady, unfortunately. We're supposed to do a Zoom interview with her. But so she lives way past like Homer and all these places, way up on this corner of the coast. Not on an island. I don't even know how to, you say island, but they're not actually islands. It's just like they're so isolated that the only way there is like a boat, right? So you say island, but it's not true. It's part of the mainland. But she lives in this place, in this village, and her people, her tribe, whatever, I think it's her people, they helped with the making of that Alaskan Killer Bigfoot show.
Oh, okay.
Right. So they were like the consultants or whatever, because
Yeah.
they had lived in Port Chatham. So they had lived in Port Chatham, and then when they were consulted, they went down, helped make the show, and then came back. And then all of a sudden, upon coming back, they start having all this strange stuff happening. And to get there, you have to take like a 3-hour drive up into the middle of nowhere. Then you have to hop a bush plane, then you got to go fly in. Like, it's not a place you can just drive to.
Right.
And so we had really wanted to go there. That was initially part of the plan for the trip, was to actually go to that village. Because the one lady we talked to was saying that they were coming up to her house at night. Like, she was having prolonged activity over an extended period of time. We were really excited to do that. It didn't end up working out because her daughter ended up in the hospital and at Anchorage or something. We're still going to interview them, but that kind of like that's a story that here would be a huge deal. I mean, in talking to the people we talked to, that was like par for the course. like that kind of like activity and that kind of weirdness. We had a lot of that stuff. We walked into a bookstore. It's apparently the oldest bookstore in Alaska, maybe the United States. I'm confused about that, but it was at least the oldest bookstore in Alaska, and it's in Homer. We walk into this bookstore, and it's a house, and the dude's just thrown books everywhere. So you walk in, there's just books stacked on top of books on the floor, on bookshelves, like everywhere. And it's kind of like heaven. And you walk in and you're like, you didn't know where to look or whatever. So I'm looking around or whatever. And I walk up to the counter after a couple of minutes, and I was like, well, first I asked him if he had any Hemingway, Eddie Hemingway. And he said, yeah. And so I ended up buying like a first edition Hemingway off this guy. But then I asked him if he had any, I was like, do you have any books about Bigfoot? And for some reason, he took that as like an opportunity to tell me this story. He used to own property at Port Chatham. And so like Portlock. So he owned property there. And he told me a story about how he sold it because he would go over there and get so creeped out just being there. But he said he had a friend who was this woman who literally watched her dog disappear in front of her. And I couldn't tell, like, the way he made it sound is like as if this dog like evaporated. I'm not sure if that's what he was saying, or if like he thinks that Bigfoot took the dog. But anyway, like, we ended up talking about Port Chatham for a while. And then he said, are you interested in like Bigfoot literature or whatever? And I was like, yeah. I was like, if you have anything, Bigfoot, anything, I'll take it. He's like, okay, well, I don't have any books, but a couple years ago, someone walked in with, with this envelope, and he goes and like looks through this filing cabinet and pulls out this envelope, and he's got this, like a classic like CIA tan envelope, and pulls it out, comes over, and it just says Sasquatch on it, like in hand, handwritten on it. And he opens it, and inside is like all these old newspaper articles, and then like an absolutely wrecked version of one of John Green's books.
Wow.
And so I start going through the stuff, and it wasn't anything crazy. There was like a 67 era PGF article from a newspaper in Alaska about the PGF.
Right.
And then there were some cartoons. They were all cut out, like someone cut them out of newspapers. And then that green book, and then they stuffed them all in this envelope for some reason, gave it to him. And he's like, make me an offer. So I gave him $50 and I left with it. But it was super cool because it's like one of those things where like you never would expect to find that in a used bookstore in Homer, Alaska. But I found it there.
Yeah, and it's just amazing how, like you said, like how ingrained in the culture it is up there, that just like everywhere you turn, someone's got a story or someone's got something related to it.
Yeah, no, it is. It's every single person we talked to had a thing. Perfect example. So final 3 days of the trip, I always try to save the helicopter for the end of the trip, because it's kind of like fun to get out there and like end the trip on this note that kind of like encompasses where you can kind of like see where you've been for the last whatever. So we're in Denali and we rent this helicopter, and part of the deal was they don't do this normally, but because I was in the Adirondacks and I convinced the pilot to take the doors off, that's like my new thing. So we convinced them to take the doors off the helicopter.
Nice.
And so they're like, yeah. And then they offered us like 3 flights or whatever. They're like, we can do this, this, or this. You know, do you want to see the alpine area? Do you want to see the forest? Do you want to get up into the mountains? And like, realistically, if Bigfoot's there, it's not up in the mountains, right? Because there's no cover, there's no food other than the ram, stuff like that. So we're like, take us to the forest and the rivers, but we want to see those things from above. So also fly us up to the alpine. So that's what they did. They actually flew us over all the forest and everything around Denali, and then landed on top of this mountain. And then like, dude, once in a lifetime, like there were so many on this trip, so many moments on that trip where I was like, this is like a once in a lifetime moment. Yeah. And that was like one of those things. They land on this mountain and you felt like you were above the world, like on top of the world. And we get out, you know, and you walk out on this mountain and you're looking across this sea of mountains. And then Denali is like there, you know, like Denali itself is like across this sea of mountains. And we start talking to the pilot. He's a younger dude, you know, like Alex and Eli got him laughing about poop or, you know, something stupid. And so then he lightens up and he starts talking to us about, well, you know, I've seen some stuff out here I couldn't explain. He's like, I've seen some stuff walking on 2 feet through the woods that I don't know what it was.
Wow.
And he's like, I actually look for tracks when I'm up here. And he's cool. Like, so we get back in the helicopter and we fly down off this mountain. You know, it's this crazy thing where it's insane. There's so many things you wish you could take other people along for. I mean, the real thrill of doing this is that you can put it on camera or whatever, and your audience can see it. But like getting the crew getting to be there is always so cool. Like Alex brought his girlfriend.
Oh, nice.
Nushig. And so she was up there with us, and Courtney was up there with us, and Eli is up on this. And the doors are off, and you're flying over or around the largest mountain in the United States, right? Like, I mean, it's wild. And we get down over the forest again. We're going real low, like super low. And the pilot is looking down and he's like, he's like, I'm not just saying this. He's like, there's a line of tracks right below us that I don't quite know what they are. Wow. And I'm like looking down and I can see what he's talking about. And I'm like, dude, if you find Bigfoot out here, I will give you a bonus. Like we didn't, but like, it was crazy because I could see what he was talking about. You had this line of tracks going through the wood. It was probably a bear or something, but you know, the whole trip is summed up in that one stupid phrase, like once in a lifetime. Like even if we, you know, when we go back, there's only one time you're going to see it for the first time.
Exactly.
And that's what this was like the first time. It was kind of like my first time seeing the high peaks, right?
Yeah.
Like because I'd been to the Adirondacks however many times, and I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to you, but like I talk about the Adirondacks constantly. I've been to that area so many times, but you don't understand the scope of it until you actually go to the high peaks. Yeah. And so like I've been tooling around like Whitehall and like that. And I love that area. Like I love wells and all that stuff. But you think Adirondacks and you're like, okay, well, like I've experienced it. And then you hop in a helicopter and they take you up to the high peaks and you're like, okay, I had no idea. And it was like that times 1,000. Like, I mean, it was like we were in Colorado back in September and did the what is it, the top of the world or whatever, the highway that runs along the top of the Rockies.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, how do you top this? I mean, Alaska laughs in the face of
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Of all the epic scenery that you're going to see here in the lower 48. Like it's on another level. You get out of the airport, you walk out of the airport, and you're looking at something that would fit right in the Rockies, and that is a baby mountain in Alaska. You know, like you go up to that Healy Denali area, and it's a completely different world. I mean, there was a point in the drive from Anchorage down to Homer, where for an hour we were driving along the coast, and on the other side of the coast is that volcanic range.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like that whole volcano. Those are all volcanoes.
That's insane.
And like you're like, this is another world. Like it feels like you're on some other, like it's sci-fi or something.
Well, it really is like such a untouched frontier. It's like, you know, we're here in the lower 48, and a lot of people just haven't been out there. And I mean, I have, obviously, and it's just, you know, there's not, like you said, there's not a lot of people living out there, and it's just, I can only imagine what it looks like out there. It's like untouched.
It is like that Denali Healy area is especially the area, you know, you can see where they're starting to develop it more, especially Anchorage. Like we didn't love Anchorage. I was actually really fascinated down on, you know, we had been there the whole like 15 days or whatever before we actually got to what I would call a touristy area.
Okay.
And that was in Anchorage. It was down on like their tourist row or whatever. There was like DoubleTree and like all the kind of like classic, like, and there's gift shops and all that kind of stuff. But there was an old abandoned movie theater, and in front of the movie theater, they had put a mural, not a mural, but they were like trying to sell the building. So they had old pictures of what that movie theater looked like in its prime. And what that street looked like in its prime. And weirdly enough, that was the moment where I was like, yeah, I love it here, and I would move here in a heartbeat.
Wow.
Like being down there on like that tourist area and kind of like seeing what Alaska once looked like, and then realizing that the area we had been in, Healy and further, like that's what it still is like. When so like I'm like a very I tend to be really antisocial. Like I was homeschooled. I was like, I grew up mostly around my family. Like I'm not a super social person. And on this, and on this shoot, we had been kind of trapped together on the crew, you know, for like almost 2 full weeks. By the time we got to Healy, we've been all together for like 12 days or whatever. And so instead of staying all together in an Airbnb, I booked myself a Frontier. It was called a Frontier cabin. It was a dry cabin. They didn't have running water or anything. So outhouse, all that stuff. And it was like 3 miles from the other Airbnb. It was on the other side of Stampede. And so that was actually where I stayed for the last 4 nights, was this dry Frontier cabin. And I would wake up in the morning and walk out my front door, and I was looking at Denali National Park. Like that was the front yard of this cabin. And I am by no means an outdoorsman, or as far as like, I wouldn't know. I would look like an idiot if I tried to pretend I'm like Les Stroud or Alexander Pettikov. That's just not me. But like, that was the highlight of the trip for me, was staying there, being alone, and you know, like just finding myself out there by myself at times. It is, and honestly, man, like even if what you love doing is going to a really great brewery and eating really great food and then hiking during the day or whatever, like go to Healy. Go if you want to go to Alaska and just experience Alaska I mean, it's all gorgeous. You're not going to go wrong. But that Healy area where Stampede and Denali and all that, there's touristy areas there, but you can't go wrong in that Healy area itself. It's absolutely amazing. And that 49th State Brewery is the best brewery I've ever been to in my life.
Really?
Amazing, absolutely amazing food, drinks. It's all great.
I got to get my wife out there. We're like beer snobs. So
yeah, go.
That'll be a good place to go. I can drag her out there.
Yeah. Where do you go in New York?
To breweries.
Yeah.
We mainly go to places up in Massachusetts because that's where her family's from. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a couple of places here on Staten Island that we go to. So like Flagship. There's a big brewery up in like Sturbridge, Massachusetts called Treehouse.
Okay.
And it's huge here on the East Coast. I mean, people down here in New York like will kill for it. We've gotten people messaging us on social media, like people we don't know. Like we're posting pictures and they're just like, do you have any extra? Like I'll come by and buy it from you. Because they don't distribute. You have to like go up there to get it. They don't put it in restaurants. They don't. You have to go. You have to get it canned, or you can have it. Have it on tap there. But
what town is that?
It's Sturbridge. It's like it's right when you cross over from Connecticut. If you're going north, so it's like the Connecticut-Massachusetts border.
I'm going to be in Massachusetts tomorrow.
Yeah, you said you're going to see a concert.
We're going to see. We're going to Worcester on Saturday. We're seeing. Oh, dude. So I'm an old school emo kid.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're seeing the Vagrant. It's like Vagrant Records 25-year anniversary show.
Okay.
They only scheduled 2 of them. One was out in LA, and then the other's in Worcester. And it's like the Get Up Kids and Dashboard Confessional and the anniversary, a bunch of like old school OG emo bands. And so
cool.
that's where I'll be on Saturday. But I've never been to Boston, so we're going to Boston. I mean, I've driven through Boston, but I've never got to go. So we're going to go do the Freedom Trail and walk around and check out the history stuff. So how far is that place from there?
From Boston? If you're
too
going,
far?
Probably too far.
I
think they've opened up some satellite locations though. So you might, I don't know where though, but we always go to the one in Sturbridge.
Yeah.
And it's huge. It's just like this huge facility. You drive in, there's like this big arch. We call it Jurassic Park because it's just like you walk in and it's like going into Jurassic Park. There's just this big archway with a sign and you got to drive up and you go into the parking lot. And it's huge. It's just, and there's always a line. There's always tons of people there. Worcester is a bit north. Worcester's probably 45 minutes north of it. Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, we kind of stick to the same breweries, and if we go to like local liquor stores and stuff, we'll try to find local. Whenever I go up to the Adirondacks, I try to find stuff up there. I go to like the local beer distributors.
Have you gone to the Great Adirondacks Brewing Company in Lake Placid?
No, we have plans to though.
Okay.
I kind of discovered it right before the pandemic, and I told my wife, "It's like we got to get up there." And then the pandemic hit, and we haven't been on vacation since. So that's one of the trips. Was my buddy Josh lives up there that way. Like who I go camping with. So we want to plan a trip up there to the Adirondacks and do all those breweries and those little towns and stuff.
Harpoon is based in. Isn't Harpoon in Massachusetts or New Hampshire? Are they? I like Harpoon a lot.
Yeah, I think they're Massachusetts Harpoon because we get that a lot when we go visit our parents and all the restaurants they have like Harpoon stuff. Yeah,
I'm a fan of that.
Yeah, but they got some good stuff. Where in Worcester are you seeing the show?
What is it? The Palladium or
the Palladium? Yeah,
Palladium. Yeah. I don't know. Dude, it's like one of those things where this year is the year where I'm trying to catch up on all the shows I've missed out on over the last like 5 years. So, we went and saw. I went down to the caverns in Tennessee, which is like a literal cave that's a concert venue. Nice. And I got to go see Jimmy Eat World and Dashboard there. And then, what else? So then we're doing, I'm doing this show, and then I've got Third Eye Blind tickets to see, I'm going to see them in Indianapolis, mostly because Sun King Brewery.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really great place. I discovered that back in like, what was it? I think it was February, and that's my new favorite. That is my absolute
really?
that. And then there's a place in Colorado called Busy Brews, Busey, in Nederland, Colorado. Such a great place. And by the way, I go to these places mostly because of the food. like Busy has amazing pulled pork nachos, and then Sun King has this like taco stand inside the brewery.
Oh, wow.
where you get it's so great, dude. But yeah, I'm just trying to catch up on concerts right now. So I have tickets to see. I'm going to go see the Wallflowers. I'm seeing I might take my son to see. My son's obsessed with what is that band? There's something. Anyway, this is completely off topic, but I'm trying to catch up on all that stuff. So,
oh yeah, I think we all are. Just the past 2 years, just not not being able to do anything, and again, like we haven't gone real on a real vacation since before the pandemic. Like we were saying earlier, like the last movie I think I saw was the Batman. Or Spider-Man No Way Home. I forget which one came out first or second, but that was like the only two movies we saw in theaters. Once like the mask mandates were lifted here and everything. So it was nice to get out. Be part of society again. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us for part one. We'll be back next week with part two. Seth Breedlove. He's going to talk more about On the Trail of Bigfoot, the journey, going to the Adirondacks, and we're going to talk more about American Werewolves, which is an awesome flick. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week. Make sure you give us a like and a subscribe. Thanks, everybody.